Hi, I'm Troy McClure. You may remember me from such energy slidecasts as Springfield's Adventures with Privatization and Nuclear Waste, Safe Enough to Eat.
Mr. McClure!
Hey there, Bobby.
It's Jimmy! I'm curious to know what the best way is to organize an energy market. Is it a traditional, centrally planned system, or a competitive, decentralized system?
Whoa, Jimmy. You just asked a mouthful. To answer your question, let's pay a visit to the Canadian province of Ontario. By going back in time, we can examine how changes in technology and legislation have helped shape Ontario's current energy system. This should help you understand the advantages and disadvantages of both public and private energy systems. You see, Jimmy, it all started back at the beginning of the 20th century with a man named Sir Adam Beck. He was the first chairman of the Hydroelectric Power Commission of Inquiry and promoted the idea of supplying power at cost to municipalities in Ontario. His work with the Commission in 1905 led to the passing of the Power Commission Act in the following year, an act which established the HEPC of Ontario.
But Mr. McClure, what does HEPC stand for?
The Hydroelectric Power Commission of Ontario, Jimmy. Up until the early 1920s, HEPC's primary role within the provincial energy system was as a transmitter of energy. By constructing its own transmission lines, it was able to purchase energy produced at Niagara Falls and other hydroelectric projects and then distribute it across the province to municipal electric utilities. In turn, these utilities distributed the energy to local homes and businesses, ensuring lights and appliances had an abundant source of power. From the mid-1920s to the end of World War II, Ontario experienced province-wide electrification. HEPC bought out the assets of the largest remaining private power company, the Electrical Development Corporation, and continued to tap the potential of hydroelectricity. It also completed a system-wide standardization effort, integrating all its power stations and transmission systems into one interconnected network. Despite the vast spatial distribution of Ontario's water resources, control of the energy system was highly centralized. With HEPC paying no taxes and acting as a government-owned monopoly, it guaranteed a reliable supply of energy to the entire province.
Jeepers, Mr. McClure! Does that mean a publicly owned and operated energy system is best?
Well, Jimmy, public systems like HEPC do have their advantages. For one, they ensure reliability through investments in transmission and distribution infrastructure. Without the HEPC, no private companies would have been in a position to create a single integrated grid. They are also cost-effective, because the price of power is averaged out across cheap baseload and expensive peaking station. This ensures that there are no exceptionally high spikes in energy prices during supply shortages. Economies of scale also help to reduce the infrastructure costs. More importantly, though, centrally planned energy systems safeguard the public good. Energy is crucial for residents, businesses, and industry. Therefore, its provision can't be left up to the cost-cutting, profit-maximizing mentality of private corporations. But before we crown publicly owned power systems king, let's continue our historical tour of Ontario's energy experiences. You see, Jimmy, it wasn't until the post-war boom in the early 1950s that the HEPC began to experience challenges. With the demand for power rising and all accessible hydroelectric sites already exploited, Ontario had to turn to alternative sources of generation. Over the next 20 years, it supplemented its fleet of hydroelectric facilities with coal-fired power plants and eventually nuclear. Then, in 1974, the Power Commission Act was replaced with the Power Corporation Act. Under this legislation, HEPC became a crown corporation known as Ontario Hydro. This formalized Ontario Hydro's role as a profit-driven entity, rather than a mechanism solely used for protecting the public good. With growing concerns over the cost of nuclear power, coupled with the economic recession of the 90s, a detailed review of Ontario's electricity system was conducted. The report concluded that Ontario Hydro should focus more on demand-side management and less on supply-side planning. This made Ontario Hydro operationally dysfunctional, because its mandate as the province's energy supplier conflicted with its profit maximization objective as a corporation. On one hand, it wanted to increase revenue by contracting more generation, building more transmission lines, and selling more power. On the other hand, it was also responsible for pushing energy conservation programs among its industrial and commercial customers. To correct this, the Government of Ontario passed the Energy Competition Act in 1998, which divided Ontario Hydro into 3 separate companies. The Independent Electricity Market Operator, or IMO, responsible for regulating the energy market and controlling the grid, Hydro 1, responsible for managing the transmission system, and Ontario Power Generation, or OPG, in charge of the generation assets. Under this competitive market structure, generators and loads make bids and offers to produce and consume power in 5-minute intervals. The IMO collects all these bids and offers and matches them up to ensure the cheapest generation is dispatched on.
So, Mr. McClure, does that mean a market-oriented system is best?
Well, Jimmy, having a retail and industrial market for electricity does have its advantages. For one, it tends to be more efficient, basing prices on short-term marginal costs rather than average long-run costs. Most importantly, though, the market is self-regulating, which means that projects that investors don't think will generate reasonable returns won't be pursued. It's not a perfect system, though. Within the first years of the market being open in Ontario, there were huge price spikes and a major blackout. To maintain reliability, the province had to pass the Ontario Electricity Restructuring Act, which created the Ontario Power Authority to address future power system planning issues. Remember, Jimmy, there are pros and cons to both private and public systems. In the end, though, it's usually safe to have a competitive market with some forms of regulation to protect the public good.
Thanks, Mr. McClure.